for making the effort. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the online launch of Kerstin Pilz, Loving My Lying, Dying, Cheating Husband, available now in all good bookshops. So we are the first cab off the rank, actually, to celebrate the birth of this book baby with Kerstin. So she's broken her foot in the meantime. So thank you so much for joining us and helping us celebrate all the hard work and years of tears that have gone into this. Hi, Laurie.
Hello.
Gone into this book. So hooray, hooray. It's our launch day. And then Laurie, who's just joined us, is doing the live event in Cairns as part of the Tropical Writers Festival on March
9th, yeah.
March 9th.
Yeah.
So people who are up north, they can go to the live one. But okay, so Kerstin and I know each other. So we're just going to get started with how did she write it and how did she get it published? What's the story behind this book suddenly appearing in the world? So, Kerstin, when did you first decide that you really needed to write this story?
Well, actually, I decided that I needed to write that story when it was happening. I knew immediately when I was going through this experience, I was quite surprised to discover that grief and death are actually taboo in our liberal Western society, where we talk about all sorts of things publicly without any problems or shame. But I found it extremely confronting and surprising and shocking, in fact, that death, as you will read in the book, and grief were sort of taboo subjects. My friends couldn't talk about grief. Even the doctors couldn't actually ever say the word death. They always said, when his conditions, when he feels uncomfortable, call us. So I was sort of left, really to my own devices. And I thought, you know what, if only there were a book out there, not a sort of boring self-help manual, but a journey that I could follow. And there's actually one author, an Australian author I love dearly, Helen Garner, her book, The Spare Room, where she talks in quite a witty, self-aware humor or voice about accompanying her friend through chemotherapy and alternative treatments, rather, for her cancer. I thought, okay, maybe the world could do with another sort of first-person memoir type book about accompanying somebody through cancer, into death and grief. And of course, mine, as the title implies, was made more difficult by this part. But of course, I started writing the book in the pages of my journal. But of course, that was just for me. That was my healing journey, journaling about it. And then eventually I knew if I were to write a book, it would have to take a distance, it would have to take a little bit of time, before I could write a book where the emotions would be more filtered and not sort of the raw anger.
Yes, because there would have been some anger, I would imagine. So, okay. How long did you have to wait? I know with memoir, it can be really, tricky. Sometimes you have to live the ending to your story before you can actually write about it. And then even then, after you've lived the ending, you still need to live a bit more so that you can realize it was the end of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could have written it a bit earlier. So in other words, I had to really metabolize the story first, or rather my own emotions, before I was able to write about it. And then what I did is, because I'm a great procrastinator, and I sort of had this self-doubt, can I really write a book that somebody wants to read? I didn't go through a world war. I just lost, a cheating husband. So is that story even going to resonate? So what I did, and some of you here will know this because you've been with me for all this time, I started writing for healing workshops and retreats. And so I created this new career for myself, which was incredibly rewarding. And it also then helped me to look at my own healing journey through the lens of my students, not through at my particular journey, but through that whole experience, how we create that distance. And by teaching writing for healing and well-being, I eventually gained that distance. And then what happened is, as we all remember, that day in March when the borders closed and the world went into lockdown, and I had just been on a retreat with an agent from London. She's actually Australian born. Her name is Jack Burns. And she had asked me, invited me to come to a retreat in Bali, which in hindsight was much premature because I hadn't written the book yet. And her retreat was all about how I would publish, or rather how I would pitch it to a publisher. And I was like, well, I haven't actually worked out my premise yet, but you always learn a lot. And so then from there, I went to Australia with a carry-on. I was living in Vietnam at the time, as Linda would know. I met Linda, who is here. She was in my writers group in Vietnam. I met Morten in one of the workshops in Vietnam. And then, the borders closed. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do now? So the first thing I did is, okay, we all need writing for healing. So that's when I met Debbie and Anissa, and Mel came back, and we had this wonderful writing group online. And then one of my participants from the Hoi An writers group said to me, hey, Kerstin, I've got a manuscript ready now. I think I want to pitch it. And I'm like, hang on a minute. She was one of my students. How come she's already finished writing her book and I still haven't started mine? This is a sign. So that's when I decided, okay, it's perfect time, the pandemic. I'm here by myself. My journals are in their cyclone-proof box where they had been for many, many years. Let's have a look at these journals and let's see if I can do something with them that will, be publishable.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me because I do a lot of editing, and I do have a lot of people coming to me with they've found old journals and they've turned them into what they think is a book, but really they've just transcribed the journals. Whereas when I came to Kerstin's book, it was not reading like journals at all. It already had a hook. It was already reading much more like a book. So how did you stop it being like that? How did you change it from your journal entries to a readable book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And well, first of all, I read a lot of memoir. I don't know how many memoir I read, about all kinds of topics that had nothing to do with, my life experience. But I realized the ones that really appealed to me were either really well written and had that sort of very snappy, characteristic voice that just wants you to keep reading, or they were plot driven. So in other words, they read, narrative non-fiction. So they still read like a narrative, like a fiction. If sometimes you can almost forget that you're reading a true story because it is written in that pacey way. And so what I then did is I started writing the second half first, when, in other words, the lying, dying, cheating husband was already dead, because that was my journey without him. And that was quite easy to write. And I found my voice there because I could write it quite with humor. And then when I had to start at the beginning, that's when I thought, how do I structure that? And that's what I realized. So the other thing I was going to say there, I did stay in close contact with two of my writing buddies who had come to my writing group in Hoi An from the very start, Jenny and Florence, and we would meet once a week and just really draft swap. Like they were working on their drafts, so we'll put it in a Google Doc, and it's like, oh, I've got a draft. Tell me what you think, and I'll do the same. And that really helped because, if one of them said, hey, I've uploaded 1,000 words, I'd go, okay, I better upload 1,000 words too, so that we can sort of benefit from that. And that was really helpful. But then there came a point when they said, look, I think you need professional help now because we can't really help you with the structure because we're just amateurs like yourself. Not amateurs, we're just beginners. We're just new writers, rather. So then I read a lot of books about structure, of course, and then I found, I don't know, just by total coincidence through a Facebook ad, a memoir coach. Her name is Wendy Dale, and she is brilliant. She's very unpretentious. She doesn't even have the big fancy website, but she's extremely knowledgeable because she's taught memoir writing for 15 years. And so it was the pandemic. She had to flee Bolivia over the green border due to some internal conflict and was now in Cusco, Peru. So I was thinking how, and then I joined her group and I had to like get up at 5 a.m. for the time zone to work out. And she had a small group of 4 people. They were all in the US. And we did the draft swapping and she gave us her feedback. And as a professional teacher, that's when I realized she was really, I mean, she was great, but she also said, you don't need any of those paragraphs. So one of the things I'm grateful for to myself is that I said from the beginning, if a professional says you need to cut that chapter, go for it, because they know what they're talking about. Even if I'm really attached, like the beginning chapter wrote, I must have rewritten that, I don't know how many times. And it started perhaps 5 pages before where it starts now. And Wendy said, the sentence that is now the opening sentence, that is your opening sentence. And from then it sort of started to flow and I started to understand how to structure it. Yeah. And I followed the classic 3-act structure, beginning, middle, end. And I really read up on that. And then I also really looked at what is a realistic word length? How long does act 1 have to be? What does that mean for the length of act 2 and so on? And so that was really helpful as well to approach it really quite structurally like that. Yeah.
But often it's a bit, I mean, you'd written your first draft by then too. So you could, once you had that knowledge, then fiddle things around. Or had you written?
I hadn't actually finished the beginning start because I found it really hard to write about, well, my late husband, because I had to make the audience fall in love with him in the way that I had fallen in love with him, so that you know the journey would work, so that they would experience the same shock and disappointment I had experienced. So, in other words, to be able to take them on that complete emotional journey. Yeah.
Great. Well, that might be a good time to have a little reading. Do you want to read us from a little bit?
Yes, and I just noticed Carol Peters has joined us from Bali, or maybe that's just a photo, but that is Bali Eco Stay. And Carol is coming on retreat, so that's very fitting. Carol, is that you, Carol Peters? Yeah. Oh, and there's Terry. Is that Terry?
Hi.
Oh, nice to see you. So we're just now up to the reading part. Edwina just invited me to read from my memoir. And as I said before, I was very lucky. I had a coach who said, you need to start your book at this sentence. And that actually did become the opening sentence. Raiding my inbox. Oops, somebody's dog just barked. All right, I'll start again. Raiding my husband's inbox is a very bad idea, an irreversible act of trespassing. I've told myself this every time I've thought about the password, and for 3 weeks, I've thought about nothing else. In hindsight, it would have been easy to guess. Tamarama, the Sydney suburb where we lived in newly wedded bliss, BC, before cancer. It was an emergency. The hospital urgently needed my husband's files. With his hands suddenly 2 useless appendages and his legs collapsing under him, Johnny had no choice but to give me his password. I got the necessary files, and that should have been the end of it, except I noticed a subject line that read like a love letter, but wasn't to me or from me. For the past 3 weeks, I felt the password tightly clenched in my aching brain. Tomorrow, I pick him up from the hospital. Tonight is my last chance. What if knowing is worse than not knowing? Until now, my inner voice, my conscience, has been loud and clear. But tonight, it is silent. I've numbed it with red wine. I pour myself another and watch the vortex that forms at the bottom of the glass as I swirl it around and around. Like an out-of-body experience, I feel as if I can briefly see everything from above. Down there, my emaciated husband lies in the hospital room, his brain having been opened and closed a week ago, his stapled head hidden under a turban of gauze. And 2 kilometers away, down over there, is me, alone on Valentine's Day in a family-sized hotel room, wondering how drunk I have to be to do this. The bottle is half empty. Why didn't I get more? I have 5 minutes before the bottle shop shuts. All it would take is to slip on my feet and run down 3 flights of stairs, but I don't move. There's a faint whisper at the edge of my consciousness trying to tell me that it's late, that I need to be rested so that I can drive my infirm spouse 3 hours north in tropical rain in the morning, that I need to close my laptop now. But I'm a German shepherd following a scent. I need to know. When I hear the roller doors of the bottle shop going down, hit enter. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, so that was already pretty much in place by the time I read it. So I was there to stay with Kerstin for a couple of weeks editing her book, and I thought, phew, thank God it's good.
Yes, because
otherwise it would be a really terrible couple of weeks.
Yes.
But
And
it
that,
was
by the
brilliant.
way, that was in 2000, and that was in the middle of so like June, July of June of 2022, I think, when you read that.
Yes, because
Yes,
it's only
yes.
2024 now.
Yeah. So then Edwina did the structural edit. So yes, that was already in place because I had the lovely Wendy tell me, hey, this is what you need to do.
Yes, and you know, Kerstin's a very experienced writer as well, so each sentence was good. So there wasn't much to do.
I'm
Okay.
also very obsessive, so I spend a lot of time polishing it. I recommend.
Yeah. So you were talking a bit about your writers group and how important it is swapping and getting the feedback. And you were saying too, you've had lots and lots of friends, like Laurie, I know, has done a reading for you as well, these beta readers. So what are they and how do they work?
Yes, so I think two things. I would give a caveat because sometimes if you're in a group with very new and inexperienced writers, they can give you feedback that's not helpful because they're not actually trained like you are, or like Laurie, who is a journalist, a former journalist, now a playwright, and also writer. So that can be actually sometimes detrimental. However, when I was working,
How can we tell?
well, that's so if you have worked together with a group for a long time, if you're all at a similar level, I would say yes, go for it. And also the other thing, so in my case, we were a writers group. We had been meeting for a long time together. We'd sort of grown together, even though I was the leader or the teacher. You know, we had grown together, and what I got from them, as I said, they when it came to giving me the final structural advice, they said, no, we are not the right people, but we can give you the gut sort of reaction. That section there is boring, or oh, that section doesn't quite work. I need more information. So that's always very, very useful. So then I had my beta readers. I call them beta readers. I can't, I need to make sure they're beta readers. So in other words, they're your first readers. And I carefully selected them in the way that I thought, right, I'll go for the least, let's say, I go for somebody who's just purely a reader, somebody who's not actually a writer themselves, somebody who's not a writing teacher or doesn't belong to a writer's group. In other words, somebody who's in a book club. I thought they would be very good.
They're often very good.
Because they can give me that first reaction. You know, it works here. This is where you know, lost me. This is where I wanted more, and so on. And so I slowly worked my way up through the ranks to the more experienced people. And also I was lucky, of course, because I run retreats. I have this wonderful network of people who'd come to my house during the pandemic. We ran the retreats at my house. And so I had some people there say, look, I'd love to read it, you know. Of course friends, but not too many friends, because I just wanted to keep it actually also like I didn't want to tarnish it, because if you give it to your best friends, you can have one or two reactions. They either don't react because they feel embarrassed to say something that might offend you, or they'll say, oh, it's great, but they don't really know about writing. So, you know, that's good for your self-confidence, but often that doesn't really give you the feedback you need. So do go, I always encourage people to go for other people who are in the same boat as you. Also,
That's why writers groups are so important, and connecting with other writers.
Yes, because also
people.
I always say, look, we need to be honest, you know, it has to be delivered in a kind way, but it needs to be honest feedback, because there's no point sweet talking it. I don't learn anything from that. And then what I did is I looked for readers who were in the US, in other words, or outside of Australia. In other words, I wanted a reader who didn't know anything about Australia, especially not the area I lived in, and who didn't know me personally. And I was lucky. I joined a forum. Anybody interested in memoir writing? There's lots of Facebook groups, and this one was I think it's an American group. It's the National Association of Memoir Writers. And because of the time difference, I was the first to see this post by a freelance editor who had said, look, I'm offering free beta reads or edits of people, 3 books, because she needed the credentials for her LinkedIn profile and her bio. So I said, hey, me. And she did an amazing job. She didn't do very much. She said there wasn't that much to do, luckily, because Edwina had already looked at it.
You found a bit I missed.
Well, she did find one essential flaw, and it was a structural flaw. She said, you make a decision, and the decision is to stay with my husband. In other words, to find a new way of loving him when I had found out that he had been unfaithful. But she says, the reader needs to be in your head with you to understand how you reach that decision. You can't just suddenly go, oh, well, now we're back together because it was just easier. I mean, it was a little bit more complex than that. And I could really see her point, because she's, as the reader, you have a contract of trust. So we trust you. And by not letting me into your head in that moment to really understand how and why you made that decision, you lose my trust as the reader. And I thought that was such brilliant feedback. And so that was a really easy fix, actually. I just put something in the middle of my central chapter, and that was very, very useful. And the other thing I should say with the structure, this is something Edwina said, she made me really aware of, where is the midpoint of your story? Do you really have the crisis at the midpoint? And so on. And that was really interesting also to learn, really about, you know, where is your conflict, and how does the arc really work? And if I open the book now, that conflict is right in the center. So I must have done it.
Yeah, that's what.
And then I worked my way up to my journalist friends, i.e. lovely Laurie Trott here, who didn't read it just once but twice, and she also did an amazing line edit. So by the time I gave it to my publishers, they said, we very rarely, in fact, hardly ever get a manuscript that is of this polished quality. And of course, that's a reflection on the thoroughness of my work, only because I had been told it is so difficult to get a traditional publisher for memoir, unless you're famous or you're the sole survivor of a plane crash. That I thought, okay, I'll have to do everything to make this book past the first sort of slush pile so that they actually take a look at it. So that's why I really made sure it was the most polished version I could possibly submit. Yeah.
Yay. Yeah. So you did a lot of self-editing. Is there anything else you would like to say about self-editing?
Yeah, I did a lot of self-editing. You can get carried away with over-polishing certain things, which I certainly did. So I would recommend write the first draft really quickly and don't pay any attention to any of that, because that first draft is only for your eyes. Don't show it to anybody, because otherwise you'll feel inhibited and you go, oh, what if they think this or that? Then the second draft, you make that the draft that you are able to perhaps share with your, like Edwina will be sharing her second draft of her new book, her forthcoming memoir with me, or the book you're writing at the moment.
Fiction comedy.
It's a comedy, yay!
Yeah.
And so then once I knew which bits were in and so on, I then started. Then that's when you can, you know, polish a bit more. And also once you know which chunks you need to let go of, make sure you really listen to people's advice, because as a teacher, I have often had people who I've said, look, that section just does not work, and here are the reasons why. And then often they say, but I love it. I spent so much time on this. I really like it. I'm going to leave it in because it's my book. And I'm like, okay, it's your call. But when I got feedback like that, I went, okay, I think they're right. And I took it out just to see, and then go back maybe a day or 2 or 3 later and go, yes, it does really work better this way. So
Yeah, I get chicken when I'm doing that for my own bits. So what I do is I cut them out and put them in a file that's called Good Bits for Later.
I have the same file, good bits for later, cut bits, cut good bits.
Yeah, because a lot you can cut and you don't feel anything, but it's those babies, that's the whole kill your darlings things, those, oh, but I worked that metaphor so beautifully in that section, and that's why it needs to be killed. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Kerstin, tell us about your pathway to publication, because it's really been so fast and
Yeah.
quite a whirlwind. It's been a real whirlwind. It's felt like, and I'm just watching from the outside. It's happened very quickly. Yeah.
Yes, I did not expect it to happen. Well, I didn't expect to get a contract that quickly. And also I had been told that the turnaround point from when you sign a contract to it hitting the shelves is typically between 1.5 years and 2. And so I turned 60 last July. And I was like, okay, I have got limited time here to pull off a second book if I want to follow this one with another one. So I did a lot of, I never believed in manifesting, but I did a lot of manifesting for this one, and clearly it worked. And yeah, one thing, first of all, I really considered which publishers, no, first of all, I almost went for self-publishing, because at the time I ran a retreat for a group of women who have a self-publishing press. It's actually like a hybrid press. So you pay them a good amount of money, and then they produce a high quality book, and they do some marketing, but essentially you need to do your own marketing. And I just don't have the reach that my publisher has, who got me into the Women's Weekly and, you know, Claire and all of these things. But I didn't know that I would be able to get a publisher like that. So then I looked at which publishers should I approach. In Australia, we're lucky enough that they that you can approach a publisher without an agent. I mean, I was actually thinking I might go for an agent. And then it was Edwina who suggested, or somebody suggested, maybe, I think it was Edwina, Australian Society for Authors has, I think it's twice or 3 times a year, they do literary speed dating. And I think other publishers do that as well. And so I signed up for a literary speed date exactly a year. It was almost to the day, a year before my book came out. So it was February, the end of February, I signed up for the speed.
See, it has been fast.
Yes, very fast. And so I went through the list, agents on, and there were also publishers, big ones, Penguin, I can't remember, like the big ones were there too. And then somebody suggested, why don't you approach a firm press? They're Australia's fastest growing independent publisher, but they actually don't mind publishing unknown memoir by unknown authors, provided it's a good memoir, obviously. And somebody said, if you go with a small press, they will actually, you know, they have more to lose. Like if you are a flop at, I don't know, Penguin or a big house, it's not such a big loss and they can move on. And they also have so many books coming out in any given month that they perhaps don't have the time to really look after you in the way that a small press can do. So I thought, okay, a firm press, and Ruby was one of the speed dating facilitators. And then I chose an agent. He was a man. I can't remember why. I think, his name was Shaw, like Edwina.
It was Lucky
And
Shaw.
he was living in Germany. I thought, oh yeah. And somebody, actually a writer I know, recommended him. And he had published a book by an unknown, a memoir by an unknown New Zealand author. And I thought, not unknown, but, new, relatively unknown author. And I thought, oh yes, that's worth a chance. So I had him first, and his body language was like very clear. I am not interested. This is a chick book and I'm not interested. And I thought, okay, it doesn't matter. And I did practice, and you have 3 minutes. And in those 3 minutes, you have to get across why you are the best person to write it. What is your central premise?
Synopsis,
What's
the whole
plot?
synopsis.
What's the unique selling point? Who are you, and who is your audience, and what are the comparative titles? So that's a lot to squeeze into 3 minutes. So I am being obsessive. I really did practice this, and then Edwina and I practiced with another friend of Edwina's, and all three of us did our practice pitches, I think 3 or 4 times by heart. And so when she came on the line, she was actually early, Ruby, but I had been sitting there in meditation already for 10 minutes going, I know my stuff. Then, of course, the Wi-Fi failed me at the last minute, so I had to look into this tiny screen. I could barely see, and I was just holding this going, Wi-Fi, please hold on. And I rattled off my pitch. And unlike the agent, I think his name was Martin Shaw, I could immediately tell from her reaction that she liked it, because she said, oh, and she chuckled in the right places, because Edwina had made sure that my memoir is written with a sort of humorous or self-aware, let's say, self-aware humor. And wisdom, of course, as they call it. So she chuckled in the right places, and I had the words lying, dying husband in there, and that's what told it to her.
Yes.
Because the unique premise. And so, however, she immediately said during the meeting, she said, oh, I'll take a look at that. And I'm like, okay, that sounds promising. So then I got the follow-up email, can you send in the entire manuscript, not just the first 3 chapters? So then I thought, well, that's very promising too. And then I didn't hear from her for 2 months. And I thought, okay, well, it would have been too easy. So let's just not get your hopes up too much. And then I thought, okay, coming up into the 3rd month, I thought, all right, it's fine. It would be too good if she had gone. Yes, because it was the first publisher I ever pitched. And I had one person who had come to my retreat, Kerstin Pilz. She pitched her book 6 times, I think, until she finally ended up finding a different solution, and she launched it last night. So I'm very pleased for her. And she self-published in the end. And so she kept saying, look, you'll just have to be prepared for many, many, rejections. And so I was preparing myself for that rejection. And yes, when we went to Bali, and there's a photo there of Bali Ecos there. I think that's Carol Peters. I can't see her, but that's our retreat place in Bali. And we're walking up the stairs. I put the Wi-Fi on, and there was a message, I really liked your book. Can we have a Zoom call tomorrow? And I'm like, I'm starting a retreat tomorrow. But so, yes, of course, we did the Zoom call. And she offered me a contract before the end of the retreat. So that was, and because she said, yeah, thank you. And she said the words that I didn't dare to say when I pitched it, because you're not meant to use a comp title. The obvious one would have been, it's a eat, pray, love for the next generation, i.e. the perimenopausal or menopausal generation. But you're not meant to compare yourself to the big guns. I mean, that sounds arrogant. So I couldn't say, oh, well, it's like that.
But just like Liz Gilbert.
She said, we loved it because it's like Liz Gilbert or Kathy Lett. And I'm like, oh my God. Thank you. Kathy Lett is an Australian author, for those who are not Australian. Yeah. And she has a book out this month too. So yeah, and then they sent me a contract, and it went very, very quickly. And also the good thing is we didn't have to do another structural edit. We just went straight to copy edit. And I had a lovely copy editor. I never met her. And even though a lot of typos had been caught, a lot of and Laurie caught more than typos, of course, she still found, because I find every layer, every time you go over it again and again, you can just find new and make it just so much more polished and crisp and succinct. And you realize I don't need that whole paragraph. I can say this in one sentence or two, and so on. So that was a really lovely and rewarding experience, of course.
Yes, yes, and here we are launching it. So talk to us about this title. You said you mentioned it it was in your pitch, The Loving My Lying, Dying, Cheating Husband. But your original title was not like this at all. And in fact, it took quite a lot of, acceptance to accept this title, but everybody loves it. People are writing to me saying, I love that title.
Yes, that is actually interesting. So those who've been with me in the writing group for a while will remember it was Falling Apart Gracefully, and that's the title I pitched to them. And people had told me, look, don't expect them to use your title, or any publisher to use your title. And I just couldn't think of sort of a subtitle for Falling Apart Gracefully, because it needed to obviously also tell that I put myself together again, because it wasn't just that I fell apart, and it wasn't always graceful. Far from it. But I wanted that word grace in the title. And so they didn't actually, they just said, look, we had a meeting, and all of this happened, of course, without me, with the sales team, and the whole team gets together because they're all very excited. We're all very excited about this manuscript. And then they came up with Loving a Lying, Dying Cheetah. And I'm like, oh, and cheetah makes me think of the animal, right? Not an unfaithful husband. And I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. I think I might have to pull out of this deal altogether.
Oh.
And then I ran it past some of my good friends who had been there with me through this journey. And they said, oh, that's brutal. It sounds like you're backstabbing him, or, what will the family think, and so on. So then they modified the cheetah, because I really didn't like the cheetah to husband. And then the sales team was adamant that the word cheating had to be in the title, because Loving My Lying, Dying Husband, cheating is the unique part of this premise. And so they explained to me, if you were a celebrity, Falling Apart Gracefully could work. But since you're not, you need to go with the central, relatable premise, so that the reader is instantly grabbed, and instantly has an idea what that book might be about. And in the end, I spent a lot of time reflecting on this, because they said, look, we will obviously always need to make the author happy. We won't go over your wishes, but they also sent out a memo saying, in the past, when we have given the last word to the author, the books have flopped. In the past, when we have insisted on our title, they have done really well. And I thought about this a long time, and I spoke to a friend of mine, Stuart. Linda would know him. He lives in Hoi An, or has spent many years in Hoi An, and he used to work for Ellen and Unwin. And he said, yes, they're right. You need to go with their advice, because books will sell that have a title like that. Your title will not sell. And I thought, okay. And I just accepted it, because I had accepted everything else from the experts. And I tell you what, everybody tells me they love the title, apart from the ones who were on the journey with me and feel perhaps a little bit, or knew Johnny and feel protective of him. But he comes off very, very nice in this book, by the way. So, my battery is going low. I just have to plug in my computer. Somehow it's not charging.
Can you do that?
Oh, good.
So that's what I wanted to ask you a little bit about.
Panic stopped.
Thank you. So for all memoirists, the ethics of memoir is such a big thing. I mean, I know we didn't talk about that before, but I just think it's so interesting, because yes, you are writing about a man you loved deeply, but also who hurt you deeply, and that you were very angry about and with, but you write him with compassion. And I've seen reviews too, talking about how kindly you treat every character in this book. So what can you say about the ethics of memoir?
Yes, that's a good point. So initially I thought, okay, I need to write, my true emotions and my rage and so on. But nobody wants to read, a book that's full of rage. You really need to and moderate. And I think it was you, Edwina, who first pointed out to me, you need to write your all characters with compassion. And then when I went through my list of beta readers, Laurie kept saying, make sure you power back that anger and write it with compassion, because that is actually what happened. In fact, many scenes I could have added into the book, which were loving and compassionate, didn't make it. And so Laurie, in her final read, insisted, make sure you put those little moments in where there was compassion and love, because it was there. It wasn't just anger, and it wasn't just rage from his point, and so on. And I feel like also, I mean, I did get a nasty email from somebody from the family who hasn't read the book, of course, and just based on the title thinks that I may have written a backstabbing revenge memoir. Now, no publisher will publish a backstabbing revenge memoir, maybe unless you're a celebrity who has other gossip on another celebrity, maybe, I don't know. But in my case, I mean, in the case of an unknown writer, nobody wants that kind of memoir. So no, this is not. This is a story of redemption and healing. And the the other thing that worried me a little bit is because initially Edwina said, well, you've actually written a spiritual memoir. And whenever I told my friends I've written a spiritual memoir, I could see their eyes roll and they go, oh my God, oh my God. But, it's spiritual in a different way, in that I was questing, seeking for tools to come to terms with grief without numbing it, without, running away from it and so on, which is what we often do in our grief-averse Western culture, where we're secular, we're not religious anymore, most of us.
Yeah.
I certainly was.
I mean, for me, the real beauty in this book is that search for meaning and that quest and that beautiful ending with the lovely Indian lady. So we won't give that away. But so coming back to the healing power of story, which you do so much teaching and your TED Talk is about. So was writing the book really healing? Did it help in real life?
Well, actually, no. The healing process happened in writing the journals. And so by the time I sat down to write the book, I had healed. I had moved on. I had started a new life in Vietnam. I had left my academic position when I was with him. I was still that sort of other persona. And I had thoroughly moved on. I was no longer hurting from it. It's incredibly rewarding to have finally written a book when I had wanted to be a writer from the age of 8, but I moved to Australia. My English wasn't good enough initially. It took a while to get to this point. So that is very rewarding, but the real healing, the catharsis, that all happened in the journal. And I would say it happened perhaps during the teaching, the Writing for Wellbeing workshops I used to hold, because that, even though I was teaching it to others, it was still part of my own healing. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting, because I find the rewriting itself and the redrafting can help you see it in another way as well.
Oh, yes, of course, certainly that is true. And when I got this little bit upsetting email, or it was actually public on my Facebook page, I was thinking, well, the book is my story, and nobody can take that story away from me. I have the right to tell my story. This is the way I lived this experience. And so it is empowering and healing in that you own the story that you write by rewriting that arc. Yes, that is healing. But I guess I had already done that in the journals and in the TED Talk, in a way. So then writing it like this was just actually, well, once I found the flow, it was also a little bit fun to write it this way, I have to say.
Yes, well, adding the humor. So, yes. All right. So let's open up for questions now. So just put up your hand. I mean, in real life, or you can use the little emoji thing.
I know it's dinner time, so a lot of you are probably have your photos, video turned off because it's dinner. But please show your faces.
Well, I'll ask you another one then. I don't know, what have you found the best bit about getting published?
Oh, the best bit. Well, that is finally done, because I was so sick of, having to look at this again. I mean, really, I thought if I had to go through 26 rejections, I probably wouldn't have continued. As in, I saw a workshop. I went to a workshop of another writer, and she said, when she got her first rejection, she didn't have the confidence to approach another publisher for 2 months. And I think that's what would have happened to me. And so it's very empowering. And it's empowering to finally be doing what I wanted to do. And the good thing, I mean, in my case, I would have probably self-published had I not had the good fortune for a firm to say yes immediately. But the good thing about this is I have a publicist who has a much better reach than I would ever have. So she has actually made possible things that I would have never been able to, like Women's Weekly. No way I would have been able to, pitch it to them, or there's others that she's got in the pipeline. So fingers crossed they all come through. But yeah, Laurie has the question.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go, Laurie.
can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, I'm going to phrase this in terms of the Queensland state elections are coming up. And apparently there's some phenomenal number of people who have not, that seats that are uncontested.
Oh,
And yeah, I know. And it's been floated that the reason for that is because of that horrible thing that social media can be, and that people just aren't putting their hands up to go there. So it's more than 50% of this are not contested for our 16th of March elections. In regards to social media and the keyboard, they're not warriors, they're cowards, but all those people. So just a practical question, what have you done, Kerstin, to think about, and has your publisher helped you put in place things to actually protect you in case, I mean, with everything, you've got to expect
that's a good
like
question.
great question, Laurie.
What can you do? What have you done? How are you protecting yourself going forward?
Yeah, good question. So I was a little bit shocked when this vicious it was a public post under somebody else's, somebody had posted put this vicious sort of thing up. And I mean, it's a family member, so I expected that from them, and it was all, untrue and whatever, it doesn't matter. So my publisher just simply said, make sure you change, well, in terms of social media, we haven't done anything, but in terms of preparing the book so that I couldn't get sued or liable, we changed any recognizing features of some of the people, so that really, like, okay, so one of the lovers, because he was cheating, so he had lovers. So one of them, I completely changed who she was, as in real life. I think she was a doctor, and I made her a dentist, and her husband empire, and I made it dry cleaning empire, whatever. So you can't actually find or recognize this person.
Sure. Yeah.
But also she has only got a very, but and then with the family members, I changed their names. The family member who wrote that vicious thing, I gave that person 2 lines, and it was all fine. It was all nice things, nothing bad. I cut down anybody who may, get upset. So in other words, I had, for example, in real life, we had to move in with my husband's daughter, whom he had a very difficult relationship with before his cancer. And then suddenly when his cancer was apparent, she wanted him all to himself. She made it very difficult for us, difficult time. So initially, when I wrote the first draft, I had lengthy chapters on that. And then in the end, I cut it all down to maybe 1 page. So, and she comes across as very benign. And you just have to, make sure the story is not about that. In terms of social media, I have had only wonderful feedback, comments, interactions, because two things. I have my online community, so people like Debbie have written beautiful reviews, and people who know me on Facebook are all super excited for me and have done lovely things like share and share it with their friends and write nice things. And I found on Instagram, I'm interacting with the community of, let's say, new, not so famous writers. So we have Australian writers who are, you know, famous in Australia and perhaps overseas. And then we have the sort of the new ones, like they're maybe one step ahead of me. And so I have been networking with them, and that's such a wonderfully supportive community. So for now, I have only found lovely feedback, and lovely Terry shared my post, and we've been writing. Well, Terry also came to Vietnam retreat, the very first Vietnam retreat, and Terry also published a book, which I've actually shared in my newsletter. So yeah.
Oh, lovely. I think Maud's got a question too. That was a great question, Laurie. Off you go, Maud. You just have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so very much, and congratulations from Stockholm, Kerstin. Soon we'll take your
Stockholm, where my name comes from. Actually, Sweden, and Mel has a question too. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So two small questions hidden in one. When I first met you in Hoi An at the workshop in 2018-19, the new year there, you were writing a beautiful piece about when you were bicycling to the market in the Vietnamese pajama, and you left your academic life behind you. Now the future was coming.
Yes,
Still,
I know about how it's doing everything braless. Yes, go on.
Exactly, braless and the lipstick. Yeah, excellent details. Still, I just want to know, what use did you anyhow have of your academic experience? And can you please recommend maybe 2 memoirs, More Than Eat, Pray and Love, throughout your process? Thank you.
Oh, yes. So hang on. So recommend 2 memoirs. And what was the first part with the academic? Just can you say that again?
What use did you anyhow, even though you cut loose from it, did you have from your academic career or your academic experience when you were writing the book?
Yeah, that's a good question, Maud. Thank you. So the academic in me is, of course, the researcher. So I research everything really thoroughly. And I sometimes work with writers who come to me for advice, and they, how do I pitch it? And I said, well, have you done any research? I went, oh, no, I just wrote it. It's like, yeah, well, it might be helpful. So yes, as a former academic, lots and lots of research. I just love research. I mean, I overdo it, you know, so don't overdo it. Don't and yes, in terms of recommending memoir, you know what, just off the top of my head, I might put that into my so I read a beautiful one recently, which by actually, her endorsement is here on the back of my book, Susan Johnson, and she's an Australian author, and her latest memoir is called Aphrodite's Breath. And it's about her and her mother moving to Greece for a year. Her mother is over 80 at that point. And she just has that beautiful voice. I just love authors who write in a beautiful, distinctive voice. I just love that. And let me think of another one. I have many up my sleeve. So
while you think, I'm going to give a plug to Susan Johnson's A Better Woman. It's her first memoir, the same writer, but it's A Better Woman. I just thought, Yvonne, that's a really good one for you, because it's about a woman who has birth trauma. She actually got a fistula in Australia, so it's very common. We know it from Africa, the young women who get hole between the passages, so between the vagina and the anus. So she just does it so well and with such honesty that, yeah, it will work for your women's issue memoir as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Edwina.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
That's yours now, Kerstin. Yeah.
Yeah. Tara Westhover, Educated, which was a bestseller. In fact, Barack Obama put it on his Christmas list or something when it came out a few years ago. And I really liked that. She grew up in a Mormon family, you know, they were preppers, you know, American preppers, and didn't send her to school. And eventually she managed to go to high school, I think at 17, ended up in Cambridge doing a PhD, and then taught herself how to write by listening to the New York Times podcast on how, you know, you write a book, and wrote this memoir. And it's so well structured. It's just a joy to read.
What's her name again? What's her name?
Tara Westover, and Educated and it is about her getting an education. So breaking out of this Mormon family that, you know, did homeschooling and so on. Mm.
Yeah. Okay. And Melinda had a question too.
Yeah. And Melinda is in the Philippines, but she's
we have people all over the world. Fabulous.
Hi.
Resident.
Hi, Kerstin.
Hello.
Okay, my question is about your writing process. So when you actually got into it and actually started to write, how did it flow? Did it flow really easily once you got going, or did you have like places where you really got stuck, where you might have been a bit scared to uncover bits of the story?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm not sure if you were here then, I wrote the end, or the part after his death first, because I found that easier, because that was my own journey. He was no longer there, so I didn't have to write about him. I just had to write about my grief, or my, you know, sadness about it. And that flowed quite easily. And also I had some of those sections already fleshed out in some workshops, so I sort of were able to piece a few things together. And then having to write about him at the beginning, as I said earlier, as the person that I fell in love with, so I had to make the reader fall in love with him as well. I found that a little bit challenging. But somebody, well, actually, Jack, the agent from London that I retreated before I started writing the book, she said, just think of Kerstin Pilz as Priscilla, or give her a different name. And she's no longer Kerstin, she's just a character. And she Priscilla on this adventure. And that really helped to shift my mindset. And when I learned from Wendy Dale, the crucial, really eye-opening sort of teaching for me was the difference that between scene and narration, or transitions as she calls them. So in other words, try to take the reader into the scene. And then, of course, you can't write a whole book in scenes. You close the scene, and then you could have transition where you summarize certain elements or characters or backstory, and then you go into another scene. And that actually became exciting, because I thought, oh, how do I start the scene, you know? But of course, we all have bad days and so on. So, and I've had this conversation with you once before, where I say, what really worked for me was to discover a routine. So it was the pandemic, and I was stuck by myself in Mission Beach for the first 11 months, and in this house, and it's a small town. There wasn't much happening, of course. So I started getting into fitness, and having a really strict fitness routine, where I go 5 times in a week, which now is impossible with my leg, to this boot camp group. And so by we go 6 to 7. So by 7 o'clock I've had, because I also got diagnosed with ADHD last year. I didn't realize that was what my problem had been for a long time. And I've had that dopamine. And then I go home and I follow my strict routine to then write first thing in the morning, because that works for me. You know, everybody has different ways to structure their writing process. For me, it's the best time is sort of up to 12 o'clock. That's really great to get good quality. And then, of course, have the procrastination happen, you know, or the attention drifting here, there, and everywhere. So the Pomodoro technique works. We've talked about that with Terry and with Yvonne. I think it was Yvonne. You know, you set your timer and then just do 20 minutes and just go. And when that 20 minutes, that's what we also do when we do writing prompts. You don't think, you don't let that inner critic come and sit on your shoulder. And then I usually would, in the afternoons, after having done some other things, go over and edit and polish. And I really enjoyed that process, up to the obsessive. Like, I'd still sit in bed at night going, oh, I can just polish that a bit more. Yeah.
Okay, we'll just have one last question now from Debbie, and then we'll finish up.
Yeah.
Okay, Debbie, last question.
And can we see you, Debbie?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, I can.
Yes, Debbie
Debbie in the
Williams.
corner.
I was
Yeah.
looking at Debbie Mulligan. Sorry, Debbie. Yes, hello.
hi, Kerstin. Congratulations on the book. I absolutely loved it.
Yay.
Oh, you read it. That's right. You had
I've read it.
advance
I
copy,
read
and
it.
so did Terry. Yes, I'm gonna
Yay.
say that.
I enjoyed all the book, but one of the aspects I found really interesting was the way you wrote about your parents and the way you wrote about your upbringing and how the psychology of your upbringing affected some of the decisions or the way you behaved, that you really thought about all of that and you showed us that in the book. In fact, I would have liked more. I found that really, really interesting. Writing about your parents, I presume they're still here. Read the book.
Yes. Well, let's say writing about them wasn't difficult, but then deciding to keep it in there was difficult. And I did quite a bit of work with Laurie where we did to make it a little bit more soft, right? And my parents don't speak English, so they live in Germany. But of course, my book was taken to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is another thing I could have never done. So that's thanks to my publisher, or actually an international agent we have. And of course, there was lots of interest from German publishers. So it's going to the London Book Fair next week. And she asked me, do I have any connections in Germany? Because there is strong interest. So the chance that it will become published and translated into German is now quite real. So I have to sort of fess up to my parents and say, I did write about you, but, and I really nearly shat myself when it was time to say, okay, this manuscript is now sealed. This is now what I'm submitting. And I thought, oh my God, they'll never speak to me again. But I think I had Edwina read it again and somebody else. And I said, well, it's not so bad. I had my nephew and my niece read it.
Okay.
And my niece said, look, you just have to tell them that you wrote about them. And I thought, they don't even understand what a memoir is, you know. I still don't know what a retreat is. I mean, they're not dumb or anything, but they know their world. And they're readers, you know, they're big readers, but it's just not their world. So yes, that is a little bit confronting. But having said that, I always thought that I would like to write another book about intergenerational trauma, because that's what I sort of mentioned in that section about the parents. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's what fascinated me. So I really hope that you do write another book, because I think there's another book about all that right there. And the fact that you left, you know, when you were 18 and you've traveled the world and you've done all that, escaping that intergenerational trauma, that's kind of what I read in the book. That's what I read in your book.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that feedback, Debbie. That's really, really interesting. That's sort of...
And I think there's a book there. So yeah. There's your third book that you're going to write.
But can I write another memoir? Because I was like, I can invent anything now. Terry, did you have another question? Oh no, you're waving away, flight.
Yeah, and we better finish up too, because it's past.
Yeah, I was just going to take a photo, please, if I may, because this is so exciting, having so many lovely people here, and it's very short notice, and I really apologize for that, but I just thought we had to do it. So thank you.
Right. People, let's declare this book baby officially launched.
Yay!
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
I look forward to seeing you in various places. And thank you so much. And I hope Maud said she might come for a retreat sometime. So I hope we'll meet somewhere. And if not, we'll meet online. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Congratulations, Kerstin.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
In the wild, please send me a photo, okay? Because I have my foot injury, so I can't go anywhere. So send me a photo.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.